Hey guys, Will here. Welcome back to the channel. So today's video, we're going to be getting started on our review series on the Simagic M10 Direct Drive Wheelbase and the GT1 wheel as well. Now we also have a GT4 Formula style wheel here as well that we'll be taking a look at. A little bit more information on that a bit later on. But yeah, the Simagic wheelbases have exploded onto the scene over the course of the last couple of months. But interestingly, it's actually a brand that's been around since about mid-2018 now. A brand that originates out of China, and because of the various different censorship laws and things like that that there are in China, they've never really sort of, I guess, come outside of that Chinese market until now. But they've been doing a big push recently on social media, basically talking about pushing to the wider market globally. And yeah, it's been attracting a lot of attention, primarily around the fact that this is, at the moment at least, the cheapest direct drive wheelbase that you can buy. So it's going to be really interesting to see exactly how this stacks up against some of the other wheelbases that I've tested over the course of the last year. And yeah, see whether it is something that is worth your money or something that you should be steering clear of. So a little bit of disclosure before we get started here. As I mentioned, Simagic have been doing a big push on social media recently, and part of that push was they put a post up, which you guys dobbed me in on actually, basically calling for influencers, as they said, to purchase the gear at a discounted rate and then do a bunch of reviews, which they would post on YouTube and things like that. Now, I originally actually spoke to Tyler, the guy from Simagic, and said, look, you know, because I already have direct drive wheelbases, I'm not really particularly interested in purchasing this for my own use, simply because I don't need it. And therefore, I originally had intended to sort of give this a miss. I couldn't really justify spending the money, to be honest with you guys. And in the time since then, there has been some really good independent reviews come out. Lawrence in particular did a really good review. There was another guy called Chris that did a really good review as well, and I'll link to those in the description below. Anybody that buys this sort of thing, I always encourage you, stick up your reviews on YouTube. Doesn't matter if you think that the review sucks, sharing your opinions is really, really valuable to the sim community. So I definitely encourage you guys to do that. But yeah, look, fast forward a couple of weeks, and a local Australian distributor, Philip from simrigs.com, reached out to me and basically asked, am I going to be reviewing one of these units? And I explained it to him. I basically said, look, I just can't justify the cost at this point in time. And he said, well, how about I send one up to you for a couple of weeks? You can test it out, do your reviews, and then just send it back when you're finished again. So that is how this has come to be. So thank you very much to Philip from simrigs.com for sending these up to me to borrow for a couple of weeks to put through their paces. So we're going to be tackling this in pretty much the same fashion that we did with the Fanatic DD2 reviews that we did recently. We're going to be focusing on the hardware side of things in this video. We'll put together a second video over the next couple of days where we look at the software, and then we might do a third video where we do our first drive, or we might combine that with the software review, depending on how much detail I think we need to go into. But one thing that I am going to do in today's video, which I haven't done before on the channel, at least not for a very long time, is a little bit of disassembly as well. Now, normally, by the time I get my hands on gear to review, Barry from Sim Racing Garage has already done his very, very, very detailed reviews. And if you haven't already subscribed to his channel, definitely scroll down to that description right now and subscribe to him, because he does an absolutely incredible job with his reviews, going into all that nitty-gritty detail. And look, generally speaking, when I do my reviews, I try to sort of just cover the first impression side of things, and that's definitely what we're going to be doing today. So no disrespect to you whatsoever if you are watching this video, Barry. We all absolutely love your reviews, and I'm sure that we'll all love to see your opinions on this product too, should you choose to do a review in the future. But yeah, seeing as I do have an electrical engineering background, I do have about 10-15 years experience in the repair and manufacturing industry, I figured I may as well open this up and have a look and share my opinions of the build quality. So let's start off by unboxing these guys. As I always do, I haven't opened these previously, so what I see for the first time will be what you guys see on camera as well. I want to try and keep it as raw as I possibly can. Then we'll talk a little bit about the pricing, all that kind of thing, what I think the quality is like for the money. We'll pull it apart a bit, have a bit of a look at the quality of the insides, and yeah, then we'll move on from there. So let's get started. All right, so we'll start off with the wheel, I think, because that's the bit that you're holding in your hands all the time. That's the thing that the quality of the build probably makes the most difference to in terms of look and feel and everything. So we'll start off there. That'll give us a good first impression of the quality of the products overall, and then we'll have a look at the wheelbase second. So slide her out of the box here. Now, as I said, this is legitimately the first time I've opened up this box, so I'm experiencing this with you guys for the first time. We've got a sticker sheet here, okay. So I'm not going to lie to you, the stickers are pretty low quality. That's not a real great first impression, to be honest with you guys. Just trying to get a focus there for you. You can see very, very pixelated. Looks like they're about half the resolution that they needed to be for printing. I don't know whether that's like a pre-production thing. Maybe some of the other guys that maybe some of the other guys that have reviewed these can comment on this, but none of the individual stickers here are cut out individually either. So it's all just on one big sheet, you can see. I'm not going to peel these off now simply because I do need to send this back and I don't want to damage them or, you know, soil them for anybody else. But yeah, they're all one big piece, so you'll need to cut them out individually. And yeah, the quality of the print is really quite disappointing there. So not a great first impression there, but we'll set that aside and we'll move on to the rest of the hardware. Okay, so all right, this looks very, very, very different. So what have we got here? We've got a couple of little adapters too. So we'll pull those out. We'll have a look at those in just a moment. Let's just set this aside. All right, so I've got to say, I'm really, really impressed with this. This surpasses my expectation. I don't know exactly what I did expect. I've seen the other reviews on YouTube that have been done on this already, and I kind of thought that actually looked really good quality. And I got to say, the initial impression, just looking at it and holding it and feeling its weight, is that it feels every bit as nice as any other, you know, similarly priced piece of sim gear I've ever touched in my life before. But anyway, let's get a little bit more objective with this and see what we can find here. So we'll start off with the carbon fiber. Carbon fiber inlay there looks to be genuine. It has the right sparkle and flare and everything to it. Their marketing definitely says or claims that it is genuine carbon fiber, and I can see there in the panel the layers of carbon fiber. So it certainly looks, I mean, it could be ABS plastic or FRP or something like that underneath the top layer, but I don't see any reason to believe that it is. It looks like genuine carbon fiber. There's a little bit of messiness in the cutting there. You can see a little bit of glue or residual layers there that have sort of melted or something like that. But again, nothing major. Certainly not what I would call a major defect whatsoever. Yeah, but it all feels very solid. The backing panel here, the aluminium chassis, is all CNC machined as well. You can see the slight texture there from the milling, and that is all very, very, very high quality as well. We've got aluminium shifters here on the back as well with a little neodymium magnets, so they actually feel really nice as well. So yeah, I mean, actually that's really impressive because you know what? Those paddles are really nice and thick. I pull on those. There's very, very, very little flex there whatsoever. Actually, let's just compare that to the Fanatec Porsche 911 GT3 wheel quickly. I've got that beside me here. Those paddles, you can see, are a lot thinner on that podium paddle module, and you can see the amount of flex that has in it. I mean, again, not that you really notice that when you're driving, but it's definitely there and something that I've seen people comment on. You compare that to this one, and there's quite it almost looks like it's double the thing. Let's actually measure it. I've got my verniers here, my vernier calipers. So chuck it on the Fanatec one quickly. 2 millimeters. Let's chuck it onto the Simagic one. And what have we got there? 3.4 millimeters. So not quite double, but yeah, substantial difference. And I mean, the numbers don't really matter. What really matters is the difference that it makes. And definitely, the quality of the carbon fiber is just as good as it is. It's almost identical actually in terms of the finish to what we have on the Fanatec wheel. But yeah, the extra thickness definitely makes a difference. And those paddles genuinely feel really, really nice. I wouldn't say they feel quite as nice as my Asher Racing wheel, but I mean, again, for the money, very, very, very good. So impressive there. Now, one other thing that I noticed as well is there's little cutouts here for an analog axis as well, so you can add clutch paddles later on if you want. Now, we do have clutch paddles on the Formula style wheel that we'll be having a look at in just a moment as well. Skip over the quick release just for the moment, and let's take a look at the actual feel and ergonomics of it. So I'm not feeling any significant amount of flex in there. There's a little bit of flex, and obviously we'll comment on flexibility of the wheel once we've actually got it put up on the rig and everything properly. But yeah, nothing substantial there. There's a little bit of twist in it, but certainly nothing that I would complain about, certainly nothing that I would say is an alarm bell. Now, they tell me that it's genuine leather. I'll admit to you, it doesn't necessarily smell like the highest grade leather in the world, but again, for the price, I think it's fair. It's funny because my old G27, which is, you know, one of the cheapest wheels you can buy, that still smelt strongly of rich leather every single time I got it out of the box, even after 10 years. Now this one, initially when I took it out of the box, all I could really smell was just plastic and adhesive and stuff. And I actually went back to the reseller and said, "Are you sure that this is genuine leather?" And he said, "They assure me that it is." Now, it's been sitting out of the box for about half an hour now while I went and had dinner. And I am starting to smell the leather smell in it now. So I do believe them that it is genuine leather, but I certainly wouldn't say it is the highest quality leather and probably not automotive grade. Now, I'm not going to be able to comment on the longevity of it, unfortunately, because I'm only holding onto this wheel for a little while. But yeah, it feels about the same kind of quality as we had with the Logitech stuff. So I would imagine that, you know, given that that wheel lasted me 10 years and still looked brand new, I don't anticipate there being any issues with this. But the stitching and everything like that all looks very high quality, pretty much the same quality as I had on my M3 steering wheel, my real life BMW M3 steering wheel that I had in my M235i. So yeah, I mean, there's certainly no alarm bells at all there. But let's have a look at the buttons now as well, other than the shifters. So have a press. So they actually feel pretty good. I mean, these 4 buttons here, they also are backlit, so they illuminate. We'll have a look at that later on once we get it powered up on the rig as well. But I mean, there's a bit of a hollow plasticky sound there. Probably more because the aluminium chassis here is hollow, so you're obviously hearing a little bit of reverberation through there. But certainly not low quality switches by any means, not the nicest switches I've ever pressed in my entire life, but certainly far from the worst. And I've pressed switches in real life race cars that are a lot worse than this, so certainly not complaining there. Now we've got a couple of toggle switches here as well. The one on the right is a momentary double throw switch, so we can press it down, we can press it up, or it can sit in the middle, and it's a momentary, so it goes back to the center as soon as we let go. The one on the left has multi-positions as well, so it works exactly the same way, except this one stays in the position that you leave it. So you can flick it down, you can flick it on, so that'd be useful for something like headlights or windscreen wipers or something like that if you wanted to. So yeah, they feel just, you know, the same as you would expect from any other toggle switch that you'd buy from your local electronics store, so no problems there whatsoever to speak of either. And yeah, lastly, we've got these little rotary encoders down here. Now these, I'll admit, feel a little bit kind of cheap. They press down as well, so they are push buttons. But yeah, they just have that kind of cheap feeling to them. They don't have a whole lot of tactile feedback when you click it into each position. I mean, it does stop in each position, but yeah, it just kind of feels a little bit cheap. And if we compare that again to our Fanatic wheel, admittedly, again, costs double the amount of money, so you'd expect it to be better. But that's got a really reassuring click in each position. There's absolutely no doubt where you've put it. Whereas with this one, you could, if in the heat of a moment when you're racing, you could very, very easily select the wrong position and not really feel that you've clicked it, or something like that. Particularly through gloves, I would imagine it would be very easy to misturn the switch. But again, we'll comment on that once we go for a drive. But yeah, look, I mean, overall, I got to say, especially when you consider the price, very, very impressive. Let's have a quick look at the quick release mechanism on the back here as well. So we'll flip it over. Now you can also see here the USB connection too, and we'll talk about that in just a moment when we talk about the connection for the data and power too. But the quick release system here is pretty clever. So at the moment it's in its lock position. You can see all of these little ball bearings that are around the inside are all pushed down and locked into their respective position. When we push that down, the collar releases, you can see the middle pushes up and all those ball bearings are released, so they're now sort of sitting outwards. So what that means is that all those ball bearings are what's actually responsible for making sure that you don't have any flex in the quick release. Now obviously we will talk about any flex that we find in the quick release, but if you compare that again to the Fanatic system, you can see they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ball bearings around the outside, as well as a sort of keyway, so there's no way that you could put it on the wrong way. Now this one, now, I haven't looked at the wheelbase yet, so I don't know whether it matters how you orient it. We'll obviously comment on that later on once we've got some experience. But having all of those additional ball bearings, I would imagine, would make for a stronger mount. Now, I know also that this is the same style quick release system that a lot of real-life race cars use as well. Lawrence, in his review video, which I'll link in the description for you, he actually mounted his real-life Nismo steering wheel with the same quick release system from his real-life race car onto his wheelbase, and that was all able to just work straight away. So yeah, I don't see any issues there either. Quick release system seems really solid. We'll see how it goes in practice, how it stands the test of time as well once people have used them for a while. Now, one other thing that we do need to mention here as well is the data connection. So you can see here we've got a little USB port. Now that, I presume, is to go with the USB cable that they included in the box. Now, unfortunately, it's not a coiled cable or anything like that, and it is quite stiff. But I presume that this would be the cable that you would use if you wanted to connect this directly to a PC, if you were using it on a third-party wheelbase. So it's good that they include the cable, even though it's probably not the cable that you would actually want to use in real life, but it's there. But then inside we've got these little contacts here as well. So we've got 5 pins here. I believe that 2 of them are power. Now, what I understand from what I've seen is that it's actually a wireless connection between the wheel and the wheelbase. So I don't know what those additional pins are for. Normally you'd expect it to be positive, negative, RX and TX or something like that. But yeah, I don't know exactly how that works. The marketing definitely says that it's a wireless communication. So yeah, I'm sort of waiting for clarification on that. Not that it really matters, but yeah, given that it's sourcing power from the quick release system, that means you're not going to have to worry about things like batteries or anything like that, which is obviously good. But yeah, I don't know exactly how that data connection works. But yeah, we can see that we have those 5 pins there. But yeah, look guys, honestly, really impressed with this. I think that, you know, the rotary encoders are a little bit cheap, but everything else on the wheel honestly feels better than I thought it would do for the price. So gotta say, I'm really impressed so far. So before we move over to the Formula Style GT4 room, let's just quickly weigh it as well, just to see how it goes. So we've got 2.068 grams, or if we change that to pounds, 4 pounds and 8.9 ounces. So I've heard a couple of people comment that it's very heavy. I mean, it's heavy, but I certainly wouldn't say it's overly heavy. It feels solid, it feels purposeful, and it feels, you know, professional, I guess would probably be the best word for it. So I certainly wouldn't say that it's too heavy by any means. I think it's actually pretty well weighted. And again, if we chuck the Fanatic wheel back on the scales again, it feels a little bit lighter in the hands, maybe, I don't know. Let's weigh it again. 2.193, so it's actually a little bit heavier than the Simagic one. So there you go. So anyway, let's have a look now at the Formula GT4 wheel. All right, so GT4 Formula wheel. Now, the first thing that you'll notice here is it has rubber hand grips on it, which I'm not sure I'm a massive fan of. Admittedly, they actually feel a little bit softer and a little bit more ergonomic than the McLaren GT3 Fanatic wheel did. So that is quite impressive. I think as far as rubber grips go, it does feel quite nice. It's quite a lot of squish there. So certainly wouldn't say that it feels bad by any means. And I guess when you're wearing gloves anyway, you wouldn't really feel the difference anyway. But no, it definitely feels comfortable to hold. Again, ergonomically, it's nice. Now, interestingly, they've gone with a 300mm diameter for this wheel. Personally, for a Formula style wheel, I prefer a little bit less. It might just be because I'm used to the 280 or so that you get with the Fanatic and Asher racing wheels. I can't remember if they're 270 or 280 now. I'll flash it up on the screen for you. I'll do the research when I edit the video. But yeah, look, I've got to say, again, impressed with the quality, the fit and finish. Everything feels nice. We've got the analog axes here this time as well, which we'll have a look at in more detail in just a moment. But again, pretty similar sort of quality, exactly the same paddles as we had on the other wheel, as you would expect. Well, the same assembly rather, and then the same thickness carbon fiber, and there's very little, given the smaller paddle, in this case, there's less flex again. So that feels really nice. The aluminium construction all seems pretty solid. We've got a little switch on the back here as well. I'm not sure what that does just yet, but we'll figure that out once we get up and driving. Same exact quick release again, obviously. And yeah, it's a sort of unibody design this time. So we've got the same plate that goes all the way around. There's a little bit of a defect in the paintwork there. I don't know whether this is anodized or painted, but a little bit of a defect there. I'm sure obviously not all of them would be the same as that, but just something that you guys might have noticed. So I figured I may as well point it out. In terms of buttons, again, we've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 push buttons, exactly the same sort of system as we had on the previous wheel. So the same feel as we had before as well. We've got 2 rotary encoders. Now these actually feel a little bit better than the ones that were on the other wheel. So that's good to note. Hopefully they all use these same ones in that wheel moving forward, because these actually feel really nice. Now, interestingly, there's a little bit of inconsistency between the 2 of them. The one on the left is a little bit looser than the one on the right is in terms of the clunk when you reach each position. So that's something interesting of note there. Again, they push down as well, so that's nice. But yeah, not a big deal there, but just something that I did notice, so I thought I'd point it out. And then we also have 2 Fanatic style funky switches here as well. So it's a rotary encoder on both sides, as well as multi-position, up, down, left, right, and push down as well. So 7 direction switches. And again, they feel relatively sturdy. I don't know how they'll go over long lengths of time, but I don't see any reason to believe that they won't be as reliable as the ones that you get on a Fanatic wheel. So that all looks well and good. So we've got these analog paddles on the back here, and initially they look really nice quality, but I do notice that they've got quite a flimsy little spring in there, and that does actually sound quite chintzy when you pull it in and out. So let's just... I don't know if you guys will hear it on the microphone, but you can actually hear that spring kind of squeaking as you do it. Now, I'm sure that when you're driving, you wouldn't hear that over the, you know, the headphones and all the other things that are going on. But yeah, they're not the best feeling analog axes that I've ever felt in my life, that's for sure. We compare them quickly to what we get on the podium paddles for the phonetic shifter, and you can see that really chunky big spring there. And those just feel a little bit higher quality. The shifter mechanism itself feels about the same, but yeah, those analog axes on the Phonetic do feel that little bit better. I mean, there's not a whole lot in it, and I am honestly nitpicking here, but yeah, the Phonetic ones do feel a little bit better. But anyway, that's just a little quick comparison for reference. As we mentioned before, exactly the same quick release system, so we don't need to go into that again. Again, we do have our little USB connection there as well if we want to use it with a third-party wheelbase. So I think it might be time to... Oh, actually, one other thing I need to point out here is these two little holes. So the wheel, from what I understand, comes with a manufacturer's emblem here. Now, I don't think that that manufacturer's emblem is licensed, so it was removed for the purpose of making the video, but that's what those two little holes are for. I don't know whether these are going to ship with it included or not, and I'm not going to say which manufacturer or anything like that because I obviously don't want to cause problems, but yeah, that's what those two holes are for. It's so that a manufacturer's emblem can be mounted on there. So just in case you were wondering what that's all about. But yeah, let's set this guy aside now as well, and let's unbox the wheelbase. All right, let's get this done. So it's good they've got some specs on the side here by the looks of things. Yeah, there we go. So we've got some specs down there. That'll give me a nice little cheat sheet while we're doing this as well. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Simagic. So all seems to be pretty well packaged here. Let's see if we can slide her on out. Sit her flat on the table. Okay, pop the lid. So we've got a couple more of these third-party USB cables again by the looks of things. We've got a USB type B connection there. So the standard one you'd have on a printer or any other wheelbase. And then we've got, what have we got here? Another one as well. So not sure why there's two included, but I'm sure we'll figure that out in due course. Got our power brick here as well. Open that up quickly. Interestingly, exactly the same kind of finish that we have on the Phonetic one, obviously a little bit smaller, but it is what it is. We've got an interesting power switch on the IEC connection here as well, so I don't know whether that's the primary power for the entire unit or not, but again, we'll figure that out in just a moment as well. What are the specs here that we've got? So 24 volts, 10 amps output. So 240 watts this thing is going to draw at maximum, which is good to know. And just so you guys know as well, it is a switch mode power supply. So regardless of where you are in the world, you will be able to just get your local plug. And I do have an Australian plug here. That is good. So yeah, you will be able to just plug in your region's plug and it will just work. You don't need to worry about opening it up and changing a switch or anything like that. So that's good. So we'll set the power supply aside, power cable aside. That is interesting that there's a power switch like that on the jug cord though, but oh well, it is what it is. What else have we got in here? We've got some looks like M6 little bolts. We'll obviously be looking at these in more detail in just a moment. We've got a warranty card. Now, warranty is something that I'm definitely going to be talking about in more detail when we come to our final thoughts part of the video. But you can see here, it looks like we've got a manufacturer stamp here saying 11 of 2019. So it looks like it was manufactured on the 15th of November 2019, one day before my birthday. There you go. It was meant to be. So then it looks like we've got our side mounting plates here. So we'll have a look at those in more detail in just a moment as well. I've seen a couple other people weren't particularly impressed with these, and it looked in Chris's video, in Chris's review, like these had a bit of flex in them. He said that it wasn't the mounts, it was the wheel plate on his rig that was flexing. Looked to me like there was still a little bit of flex in these. And I know for a fact that some of the resellers at least are looking at including their own solutions for mounting as well. So that is something that you will want to keep an eye on, but we'll definitely cover that in detail once we get it mounted up on the rig as well. So let's get the main event out of the box now. Try and figure out a tidy way of doing this without damaging anything. I think the best way to do this is going to be to slide it out like this. Okay, there we go. She's coming out. There we are. All right. Sorry, it's a little bit awkward. Okay, so I can tell you that it's a heavy sucker. I can't tell you exactly how much it weighs because it's above the weight limit of my wife's Tupperware scales, and I couldn't find the spec anywhere on the website either, but if I do find it, I'll flash it up on the screen for you as I'm talking. But one thing I noticed here is that these screws are loose, so that's interesting. That doesn't appear to actually bite into anything. It just slides in, so that's a little concerning. Same deal with that one too. I don't know what the go is there. Those just pull straight out, as you can see. So yeah, I don't know what the go is with that. I couldn't tell you. The ones on the front here seem to be okay though, maybe. Let's have a look. That's really interesting. So, okay. That one seems to be loose. That one seems to be tight. So it's almost like it's meant to go into a thread or something here, but it's just not doing it. So we'll have a look at that in a moment anyway. But another thing I noticed straight away, and I'm not trying to be critical here by any means, but another thing that I noticed here is you can actually feel quite a bit of resistance in the motor shaft here. So let's just have a listen quickly. So you can actually feel a bit of notchiness there as the servo motor rotates around. So it's going to be really interesting once we're connected up with a wheel and connected to the PC, whether it gives you a nice, smooth, non-robotic feeling. The Simucube 2 Ultimate, by comparison, completely free spinning when you're not powered up at all. So there's like basically no resistance in there whatsoever. It just free spins. But I mean, obviously what matters is what it feels like when it's actually plugged in and running. So we're not going to be too critical of it straight away. Now it looks like we have a USB connection here, do we? So I'm not sure exactly what that provides in terms of an interface. I don't know whether it's a proprietary connection or something that we can use to connect a non-wireless wheel or something like that, but we'll experiment with that once we're fired up on the PC as well in the future video. Now, looking at the nozzle here, or the nose again, you can see it's funny because we've got this pin assembly here, which is obviously the pins that meet up with the interface of the wheel like we saw before, but it's in the shape of like a Wi-Fi signal, so I don't know what the deal is with that. Obviously, there's a little bit of a scope for movement there, so the pins don't need to be exactly on the right position to work. But yeah, a little bit interesting there, so it'll be interesting to see how that all goes. We'll obviously see how the wheel mounts onto the wheelbase in a moment too. Now, yeah, in terms of the finish though, I mean, other than that issue with the bolts that just sort of fell out, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it all seems to be relatively high quality. I don't see any issues whatsoever. The construction feels solid. I'm not a massive fan of the giant logo on the top, but I mean, that's just nitpicking once again. But the quality of the paintwork seems fine. I know Lawrence said in his review that he managed to scratch it moving around at a trade show, but I mean, the same could be said for anything, so that's not really a negative point. But one interesting thing that we do have is we've got these rails on the side here, similar to what you'd have with aluminium profile or extrusion, and that allows us to mount our side rails at any position along the side of the base. So that is actually pretty smart. And yeah, I think that's actually one of the better solutions that I've seen, at least in theory, because in theory it gives us a little bit more flexibility in terms of our mounting solutions. But it'd be interesting to see whether that introduces any opportunity for flex in here, because the T-nuts don't exactly fit in solidly. Obviously, when there's pressure pulling towards, then they'll lock up against the profile. But obviously, there is a little bit of opportunity for flex there that we wouldn't have with a more solid mounting solution. So we'll see how that goes. A little bit early to judge just yet. Flipping it over, we do have what looks like some M6 slots here as well for mounting. So we will be able to utilize those with our wheel platform. And again, when we mount it on the wheel platform, we'll be able to see whether that lines up with any existing holes. But otherwise, everything else looks to be pretty solid there. So we do have a little fan hole here. Now, there isn't a fan in there, and we will pull this cover off in just a moment as well to give you a look inside, but there's no fan behind that. Now, what I've been told and what I've seen in other reviews is that they've said if they do put a fan in there, then they're actually able to increase the output of the motor slightly, but there isn't a fan in there by default, so I'm not sure what the story is there. But anyway, let's pop this cover off now and have a look at the guts. So, firstly, let's just address the concern about those nuts that just fell straight out the back. So you can see there, the holes there in the shell are actually too large for these screws. So it's not that there hasn't been a thread cut, it's that the holes themselves are actually too big for a thread to exist in the first place. So I don't know, there's no opportunity to have a nut behind there or anything like that. So either it's some sort of a manufacturing defect with the drilling or something like that, or they're not actually meant to screw into anything to begin with, they're just meant to be glued into position or something like that maybe. It does look like there's some form of a thread locker or something like that on those nuts, but again guys, let me know if you own one of these, did you have the same issue with these screws just falling out the back? Because obviously if we've got it mounted on a wheel platform or something like that, these are just going to fall out over time and they'll get lost, and yeah, they don't seem to serve any functional purpose. But the good news is they're not supporting the motor or anything like that. The motor is still in there nice and solid, and we'll have a look at that in just a moment too. The motor's actually mounted through the bottom. You saw the screws before, so it's not structural in any way. I don't see it being an issue. But yeah, just something that I wanted to address before we move any further on. So anyway, let's start off with the more basic stuff, and then we'll have a chat about some of the signal processes and things like that we see on the board here. So we've got our power connection, which runs in with a cable, and that runs to a terminal strip that sits up the back here. So if you do damage the power cable, it is going to be possible to replace it pretty easily. You will need to take the board out, undo the screws at the bottom, and then replace the, just screw them into the new terminal strip. So that's not a major issue here. Now, I'm not seeing any red flags in terms of the PCB design or anything like that. Everything looks relatively clean. You know, I'm seeing things like thermal interface material between the resistor that's sitting here and the body of the motor. You know, all those sorts of things, heat shrink and no exposed wires anywhere. So in terms of the construction, I don't see any issues whatsoever. So on the back here, we have the location sensor for the motor. So 16,385 pulses per revolution. So that's a pretty decent resolution. What that means is that it's able to define between 16,385 different positions around its rotational axis. So pretty decent there, no complaints with that whatsoever. Now, one other thing that they mention in their documentation is the tri-CPU structure, which allows for a 1000 Hertz or 1 kilohertz refresh rate for USB communication and 40,000 Hertz update rate for force feedback. So just looking at the configuration here of the board, we've got our signal processor chip there, which is actually a Texas Instruments chip. I can see there it's a TM-S320, so that is a genuine Texas Instruments chip, which is good. Means that they're not using some dodgy knockoff chip there or anything like that. Now, next to that, we have an ARM STM32F103 chip, and that is a motor controller chip. So that's obviously what's actually sending the signals back to the motor. And then this little chip that you can see just behind the wire over here, this guy here, that is a LC245A, and that again is a genuine Texas Instruments chip, and that is a octal bus transceiver. So that is what actually communicates the data between the processor and the various different other communication areas on the board. So we don't need to go into all the detail on that. So one other thing just to note here as well is that Simagic do make a point of the motor being a 3-phase power supply motor. So you can see here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just tucked in behind the other wire here up the back, you probably can't quite see it in your view, is another transistor as well. So 6 transistors, 2 per power phase to the motor. So it's good to see there that what they're saying in terms of their marketing is legit with what we're actually seeing on the board. Yeah, no problems there whatsoever. So you can see we've got our USB-B connection here, which is what controls our force feedback connection to the PC. We've got our CAN bus USB ports here as well, which we'll have a look at a little bit later on. And this blue USB cable that you can see here, I presume is what runs back to the port on the front of the unit that we saw before near the quick release. So let's talk in a little bit more detail about the motor that we have inside the M10. So it's a servo style motor, similar to what we actually have in the Simucube as well. So that's a brushless DC motor, servo type motor, and then we have an outrunner motor in this one as well. So an outrunner motor is a little bit different in terms of how it's fundamentally constructed to these two wheels, and all of them have their various different strengths and weaknesses. So really what it boils down to when selecting an appropriate motor for a direct drive wheelbase is 3 different things: torque stability, inertia, and response speed. So torque stability is basically how much torque is able to be sustained on the wheel. So you can imagine when you're driving, the torque of the wheelbase is fighting against you. And if you're in a sustained load type condition, so you're going around a corner or something like that, over time the motor is going to become overpowered. It's not going to be able to keep up the torque to fight against you, and you're going to feel a drop off in the response. So it's important to be able to sustain the torque levels that are required to provide the feedback that you require while you're driving. Now that's something that definitely hasn't been a problem in my experience with the Simucube or the Fanatic, and obviously we'll talk about that when we do our first drive video tomorrow on the M10 as well. The second thing is inertia. Now this is something that we can actually demonstrate quite well here. So if you have a look at the Simucube with its DC brushless style motor, you can see there when I spin the spindle, there's a little bit of inertia there. You feel a little bit of weight behind it, but it feels very, very natural in its rotation. Very similar to how the steering shaft feels on a real car. And we've commented on that in the review videos that we did before. But you can see there's not a whole lot of inertia there. When I spin it, it kind of just stops. If we have a look at the Fanatic one, you can see there's quite a lot more inertia there. I'm spinning the quick release by accident there, but you can see when I spin it, it keeps on spinning for a little bit more time. Now, it still feels really nice and smooth. It's got a nice weight behind it. But yeah, it does have that little bit of extra inertia, which means that with the Outrunner style motor, they're having to compensate for that in how the motor itself is programmed to respond to force feedback within the game. Now that's where we sort of get back into our previous discussions about the importance of the software, the drivers, and the firmware when it comes to what you actually feel through a direct drive wheelbase, because you don't have the belts and the cogs and the drivetrain to actually dampen the signal at all. What you're feeling is pretty much exactly what the motor's doing. So looking at the M10 by comparison, this is a servo style motor. And you can see there's very little inertia, in fact no inertia there whatsoever. When we spin the spindle, when we spin the shaft, it stops exactly where we leave it. Now there is quite a bit of resistance there, and as I mentioned at the start of the video, it does feel quite notchy throughout its rotation. Now I don't necessarily see that as being a problem just yet, and we will obviously look at this in great detail when we go into the software and first driving experiences with a wheelbase. But the reason for that, at least in my opinion, is that this is a much smaller motor that we're dealing with here. This is a 10 Newton meter servo motor that we're running here, as opposed to actually a 70 Newton meter motor that's in the Simagic 2 Ultimate. They actually dial that down for simulator use simply because you don't need anywhere near that. But the motor that we have in the SC2 Ultimate is actually good for 70 Newton meters, which is pretty amazing. The DD2 by comparison, 25 Newton meters. This one is good for 10 Newton meters. So it's less than half the size or less than half the capacity of what we have in the DD2. So therefore it's a lot smaller. And you can see just how small it was when we looked inside earlier on. So because we have a smaller motor, we also have less rotating mass, which means less inertia as well. So look, between the three of them, I mean, there's a lot of arguments online, you know, sort of discussing what are the best types of motors for each scenario. I think really what it's going to boil down to is the software optimization and firmware optimization. As long as you've got well optimized firmware that is able to actually drive these motors appropriately, then you're not really going to have an issue with any of them. So fundamentally, an industrial grade DC brushless motor like what we have in the Simagic 2 Ultimate is probably the best match for the style of usage that we have with sim racing. But the Outrunner motor that they're using in the Fanatic DD2 also does have its advantages as well. It's able to respond very quickly to changes in direction and things like that because it doesn't have quite the same rotating mass as we have with an assembly where all the mass is on the actual shaft itself. So I think that the Outrunner motor style was a good choice for Fanatic in this case, given the torque limits that we have in place here as well as the price point. But because the motor in the M10 is significantly smaller than the motor that we have in the Simucube as well as the Fanatic DD2, it's going to be really interesting to see how that goes in terms of response and change of direction and things like that. I think the size is probably going to be quite a strong advantage there. It's going to be really good to see how it stacks up in terms of strength as well. So just on the subject of strength, as we mentioned before, the M10 has a 10 Newton meter servo motor inside it. Now what they're saying is that they're actually only using 6 or 7 Newton meters of that for normal driving, with the remaining 3 Newton meters being for avoiding things like clipping and stuff like that. So they're saying that they did a ton of research along in collaboration with some real race drivers as well to sort of determine exactly how much force is required for a realistic feeling in the steering. And I think that I agree with them there, that around the sort of 7 to 10 Newton meters is about what you generally feel in a real car. And I'll admit to you as well that even with my Simucube 2 Ultimate, which is, as I mentioned before, 32 Newton meters, I generally run that at around sort of 9 to 12 Newton meters anyway. And I'm perfectly fine with that. That is stronger than I ever need. So it is going to be really interesting when we do our first drive tomorrow to see exactly how this handles. But on paper and from the first impressions looking at the hardware and everything, yeah, it seems to all be pretty good. So let's get the side rails mounted on now so we can get it on the rig and then have a look at the quick release. So we've got 2 of these, obviously, as we saw earlier on in the video. And then we've got a bag full of mounting hardware, which I've conveniently spilled out on the table already. So we've got short and long screws. There's the long ones, short ones. We've got some little nuts like this, and then we've got some T-nuts as well to go into our profile here. And then we also have a little included Allen key as well. So everything we need is theoretically there. And what we're going to do is we're going to mount it this way so we can pitch it up and down as need be. You shouldn't actually need to do much adjustment, I don't think, but you can see there the scope of adjustment that's available. So you can tilt up and down, you can mount high, you can mount low. Obviously it's going to be weird if you try to mount it lower than your wheel deck, but yeah, plenty of adjustment available here. Don't think in our case we're going to need to use much of it. Now, one thing I noticed that is just a little bit strange is that these 2 holes here are actually lower than the gap here. So if you mount it on these 2 holes, the mounting surface here actually sits a little bit higher than the bottom plate of the wheelbase. So that's not really exactly how we want it. So what we're going to do is we're going to mount it on these ones, which is going to raise it up just slightly. So we'll slide our little T-nuts in here. So we'll go and match that exactly on the other side as well, and then we'll be ready to mount it onto our wheel deck. So we've got the wheelbase mounted up on our GT track from Next Level Racing here. Now, I did have to drill some additional holes to make this fit. Unfortunately, the pre-drilled configuration on the wheel deck, despite being compatible with pretty much everything on the market, isn't compatible with this wheelbase. And that includes the 4 holes that I showed you before on the bottom of the wheelbase as well. So not compatible with those or the holes in the side mounts here, not without drilling additional holes anyway. But that's not a big deal, something that you can easily fix yourself. And yeah, look, in terms of flex and things like that, most of the flex that you're going to see here is in the wheel deck itself, not the wheelbase. Unfortunately, the GT track has developed quite a bit of flex over time, and it's something that I'm looking at remedying at the moment with a new 80/20 rig. But there does appear to be a little bit of flex between the wheelbase itself and the mount, which is kind of what I suspected based off other videos. I remember Chris's video, he said that it was the wheel deck and not the mount. But yeah, looking at that again, it definitely looks like there is a little bit. I can see movement between the plate and the actual wheelbase itself there. So there's definitely a little bit of flex. It's not going to be particularly noticeable for me because I already have quite a lot of flex in my wheel deck. But yeah, for somebody that's running this on a otherwise completely solid rig with no movement at all, I think you will notice that little bit of movement there. So that's one thing just to make a note of. Now, as I mentioned before, I know that some of the resellers are looking at doing their own brackets as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes because the movement appears to be the T-nut itself inside the slot rather than, you know, something that's wrong with the mount. The mount itself is relatively solid. It's not flexing. It's the joint or the connection between the wheelbase and the mount that's the problem. So we'll see how that goes over time. We'll see if it develops any slop over the next couple of days of driving. But yeah, there's definitely a little bit of flex there. Now let's have a look at the quick release system. So as you saw before, we've got the Wi-Fi style pattern on the side here. That needs to be pointing across to the left to match up with the pins on our wheel. So once that's done, simply hold it in position, push it on, and it slides in just like that. Clicks on really nicely, nice solid click, and comes off again just as easily. You grab it from the back, pull on it, and it just comes straight off. So in terms of flex, let's have a look here. I'm not seeing any flex at all in the quick release, I don't think. Hang on. I mean, yeah, you can see a bit of movement there on camera, but that is the that's again the wheel deck moving around. I can bend that from side to side, forward to back. There's a little bit of flex in the wheel itself, like we kind of anticipated. You can see just a little bit of flex on the rim. Not a whole lot, but it's definitely there. I mean, again, it's amplified by the fact that the wheel deck's moving, and I'm really hoping that my 80/20 rig arrives soon so I can test this and my other wheelbases properly in terms of flex. But yeah, there's a little bit of flex you can see just here. Not a huge amount though, and certainly not enough that I would imagine it would affect driving. Even if you went in your road car and pulled and twisted on the wheel, you'd have a little bit of flex there. So I definitely don't think that that's a complaint. But yeah, the quick release itself feels absolutely solid. No movement there at all that I can detect. I'm looking really closely at it now, and I'm not seeing anything. There doesn't appear to be any flex in the motor shaft either, so that's good. So yeah, the only flex that I'm really detecting at all is just the movement in the wheel deck itself, plus that little bit of extra from the mounting solution that we talked about before. So yeah, thumbs up from me. Let's quickly chuck the Formula style rim on as well, see if we have any flex there. Okay, it's on, and yep, no flex at all again. So that is really, really good. Thumbs up from me. And look, I'm going to tell you guys straight, I think that's a better quick release system than what we have with Fanatic at the moment. So yeah, take note, Fanatic, because this is really impressive. No flex there whatsoever. So thumbs up there. So let's quickly power it up and just have a look at the illumination. I'm not going to go for a drive in this video. We'll save that for the video where we look at the software and everything. But I just want to quickly have a look at those lights and everything. So we do have to use that little switch that I showed you before on the power cord, which means the power supply needs to be somewhere in reach. So that is a pain, but let's power it up here. You can see the light behind has gone on. All the lights on the wheel have come on. So we've got some RGB lighting happening here. So we've got an array of different colors here. Now, I don't know whether they're changeable or not. We'll find out when we look at the software. So there's a little bit of inertia simulation going on there as well. It has a bit of weight to it that it didn't have before when it was switched off. I can still feel a little bit of notchiness in the rotation. Again, I don't think that it's going to affect the driving particularly, but it does make you aware, kind of like with the Fanatic system, that you are playing a game rather than sitting in a real car. And that was one of the things that I absolutely loved about the Simagic 2 Ultimate, is that you genuinely felt connected to the car because it genuinely felt like a real car's steering shaft. This does have that little bit of notchiness to it So just something to be aware of there. But overall, it's not any worse than it is on the Fanatec DD2. And I certainly wouldn't say that it was a deal breaker with the Fanatec wheel either. So I definitely wouldn't say it's a deal breaker here. So anyway, let's jump back over to the desk now. We'll talk a little bit about customer service and my final thoughts on the hardware side of things. All right, so obviously we still have a lot of things to cover here. We need to look at the software and of course the driving experience as well being the most important thing. But I wanted to end this video by talking a little bit about customer support and resellers, pricing and things like that. So pricing wise, to begin with, it's going to be $17.99 Australian dollars for the wheelbase, the M10 and the GT1 wheel. Pricing for the GT4 formula style wheel is still not completely finalized, so we're not going to talk about that just yet. But yeah, $17.99 Australian dollars for the M10 and the GT1 wheel, which I think is pretty reasonable based off what we've seen so far in terms of the build quality and everything. The only real concern that I had in terms of build quality was just those screws that fell out of the back. Now, I have spoken to the guys at Simagic since that happened, and they assure me that those screws are normally just sort of for dress up. They're actually going to be doing a second rear panel that I believe isn't going to have the cutout for the fan or those screws because they're redundant, and they actually are glued in place by default. So if you do buy one of these and those screws fall out, don't be concerned about it. It's not functional, and we kind of saw that when we pulled it apart. You know, they're not serving any functional purpose, and the integrity of the device isn't compromised by that. But I have said to them it might be a good idea to remove those sooner rather than later, simply because taking something out of the box and having screws falling out of it straight away isn't a great first impression. But yeah, look, that aside, everything else, I can't really fault it in any way in terms of the hardware, mechanical layout and things like that. So very happy there. $8.99 US dollars, I believe, £7.99 and 925 euros for the base and the GT wheel. So pretty reasonably priced, it would seem. But again, we'll talk about that some more and compare it to what you're getting for the money with something like a Simucube or a Fanatec DD2 or DD1 as well once we've gone for a drive with it tomorrow. So customer service, let's just talk about that a little bit before we conclude this video. Now, this is an area that I do have a few little concerns. Now, I actually put a post up on the Sim Racers Facebook page yesterday basically saying I'm going to be doing a review on this unit and what are some of the questions that you guys have that you'd like me to answer in review. Now, Tyler, the guy from Simagic that we've been dealing with, actually posted up there saying make sure that you avoid the Simagic Dynamic website. Now, I've spoken to the head guys at Simagic this morning actually about that, and they have told me basically that their website simagic.com isn't up yet. And indeed, if you have a look at the box, it has simagic.com written on it, but if you go to that URL, it's just a dead link at the moment. So the Simagic Dynamic web page that you see at the moment, I don't know exactly what the story is there, but apparently they were going to be a reseller and then something went down. I didn't know, and I don't want to get involved in all the political side of this, but yeah, just be very careful who you do buy this from. Now, the reason I say that is also because Simagic have publicly stated now, actually on my post that I did in the Sim Racers group, that they're not going to be providing any form of customer support themselves. So all of the customer support is going to be done through dealers. So you're going to want to be very careful who you purchase one of these from, because obviously the quality of the experience that you have with customer service is going to be entirely dependent on who you're actually dealing with. So if they're completely inundated with people that are having problems, it could be a long time before you get a response. You might have problems with things like getting refunds or exchange units and things like that. So that is definitely something that does concern me. It's not to say that there won't be any support whatsoever. That's certainly not what I'm saying here. And they do certainly seem to be committed to driving the product forward into the future. In fact, even just today, I got an email from them saying that they've released a new model now with an updated shaft on the front, which gets rid of this grey bit here. So that's going to be interesting to have a look at later on too. So they definitely do seem to be committed to the product. But yeah, the fact that they'll openly say like that they're not willing to offer any form of support at all to customers directly does concern me a little bit, especially when you see, you know, you contrast that with a company like Fanatec, where Thomas, the CEO of the company, is actually active in the forums. There's multiple guys there that are staff members that are helping people actively with their questions in the community, which is great. And I know that a lot of people do complain about Fanatec's customer service, slow to respond, you know, not getting answers to emails and stuff like that. But the fact that you are dealing with one company and you're doing it all through them at least means that it's consistent. So that is something that does concern me a little bit here as well. I haven't had to deal with customer support with Simucube, so I can't really comment on that too much because I haven't actually had to put a request in with them. But I do do know that they're very active in the forums, in race department, their own forums, as well as the Facebook groups as well. So just something to keep in the back of your mind. I'm not going to say that it's a negative point at this stage. Obviously, we'll wait and see how things play out over time, but it is something that I do want you guys to be aware of. They're not offering customer support direct to the customer. It's all done through their dealers. So just be aware of that, guys. But look, overall, so far, very happy with it, very impressed. Yeah, obviously, we'll reserve final judgment until we've actually gone for a drive and seen what the software is like. As I've said before numerous times now, software is probably the most important thing in terms of the quality of the overall experience and what the actual feedback feels like when you're driving. So yeah, we're going to reserve final judgment to them, but hopefully you guys have found today's video interesting and useful. Make sure that you're subscribed and hit the notification bell as well so you don't miss tomorrow's video where we'll go for a drive and have a look at the software. Really excited to see how this all goes. But yeah, guys, so far so good, I think, and yeah, going to be really interested to see how things play out with the Simagic gear. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.